There becomes a moment in every soul's journey when the life you've built no longer fits the person you're becoming. A moment where your intuition grows louder than your fear. When the signs become impossible to ignore. When the masks begin to fall away and you realize you were never lost, you were remembering. Welcome to the Heyoka Shaman Podcast, a space for seekers, healers, empaths, mystics, survivors, and old souls navigating the path of awakening. Together, we'll explore spirituality, intuition, shadow work, healing, consciousness, energy, transformation, and what it truly means to walk between worlds. We'll have conversations about the right things that most people are afraid to talk about: the dark nights, the spiritual awakenings, the grief, the healing, the gifts, the lessons, and the profound journey of coming home to yourself. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the conditioning, the wounds, the expectations, and the fear. If you've ever felt different, if you've ever questioned reality, if you've ever known there was more waiting for you beyond the life you've been told to live, this podcast is for you. The awakening has already begun. The question is, are you ready to answer the call? I'm your host of the podcast, Haylz, founder of the Heyoka Shaman, YouTuber for the last 7 years, author, and medium. This is the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to episode 4 of the podcast. This episode is about the sacred mirror and why your triggers are your greatest teachers. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this so you understand what's happening when you feel triggered. You know, that triggering feeling, it's not always fun. So let's figure out what's actually happening here on a higher level of consciousness. Let's go. Welcome back to the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. I'm your host, Haylz. And if you've been walking this journey with me, thank you for being here. In episode 1, we stepped out of the spiritual closet. In episode 2, we answered the awakening call. In episode 3, we went through the transformation of the dark night of the soul. And today, we're diving into one of the most uncomfortable but most transformational parts of the awakening journey, the sacred mirror. So, have you ever met someone who instantly irritated you? Someone who made you feel deeply rejected, judged, abandoned, unseen, or not enough? Maybe it wasn't even something they said. Maybe it was simply their presence. Have you ever wondered why certain people seem to activate emotions in you that feel far bigger than the moment itself? Well, today we're exploring why. Because what if those people aren't in your life to punish you? What if they're here to reveal something? Let's begin. I want to talk about life being full of mirrors. One of the greatest lessons I've learned is this: life is constantly reflecting something back to us. Not everything we experience is a mirror. Some people genuinely behave in harmful or unhealthy ways, and recognizing that is important. But sometimes our strongest emotional reactions point us towards something unresolved within us. Sometimes the people who affect us most become mirrors. Not because they're exactly like us, but because they touch wounds we haven't fully healed. Imagine you have an emotional bruise. Most days, you forget it's there until someone accidentally bumps it. Suddenly, it hurts. But the person didn't create the bruise. They simply revealed where healing was still needed. And that's what emotional triggers often do. They shine a light on places inside us asking for compassion and attention. So I'm going to elaborate more into this topic, which is called shadow work. What is shadow work? Let's talk about shadow work. It's a term that's become popular, but it's often misunderstood. Shadow work isn't about becoming obsessed with your darkness. It isn't about believing something is wrong with you. It's about becoming aware of the parts of yourself you've learned to hide, suppress, or reject. Maybe as a child, you learned that being angry wasn't acceptable, so you buried your anger. Maybe you learned your sensitivity made you too much, so you buried your emotions. Maybe you learned your confidence threatened people, so you became smaller. Those rejected parts do not disappear. They live in the unconscious realms, in the shadow. And often they're revealed through our reactions to other people. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's simply the part of you waiting to be acknowledged. So I want to talk about why certain people trigger you. Have you noticed that not everyone affects you the same way? One person can say something and it rolls off your back. Another person says almost the same thing and suddenly you're overwhelmed with emotion. Why? Because triggers are personal. They're shaped by our experiences, beliefs, and unresolved wounds. For example, someone who grew up feeling ignored might feel especially hurt when they aren't included. Someone who experienced criticism may react strongly to feedback. Someone who learned love was conditional may become deeply affected by rejection. The situation is real, but the intensity of the emotional response may also be connected to experiences that came before it. That's why curiosity is so valuable. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" you might ask, "What is this reaction trying to teach me?" I want to talk about projection and self-awareness. Projection is another idea that comes up often in personal growth. In simple terms, projection is when we attribute qualities, fears, or emotions to someone else without realizing how our own perspective is shaping what we see. We all do this from time to time. For example, if we believe we're not good enough, we might assume other people see us that way too, even when they haven't even said anything to suggest it. Becoming aware of your projection doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means recognizing that our minds interpret situations through the lens of our past experience. As we become more self-aware, we can pause before jumping to conclusions. That pause creates choice, and choice creates freedom. I want to talk about the Heyoka archetype, obviously, because I love this word, the Heyoka, and I use it on my platform. So I want to get everyone to understand why it's so relevant and why it's the center of my platform. The Heyoka archetype is often described as a sacred mirror. Rather than giving people easy answers, this archetype invites reflection. Sometimes growth comes from being gently challenged. Sometimes it comes from having long-held assumptions questioned. Whether or not you relate to the Heyoka archetype personally, the idea of the sacred mirror reminds us that meaningful transformation often begins with honest self-reflection. Growth isn't always comfortable, but it can be deeply rewarding. I want to talk about when conflict becomes our teacher. Conflict is something most of us try to avoid, but not all conflict is destructive. Sometimes conflict reveals where we need stronger boundaries. Sometimes it reveals where we need greater compassion. Sometimes it helps us understand ourselves more clearly. This doesn't mean staying in unhealthy relationships or accepting harmful behavior. Healthy boundaries remain essential. But when conflict arises in everyday life, we can ask, What values are important to me here? What emotions am I experiencing? Is there something I need to express? And what can I learn from this experience? Conflict doesn't have to define us, it can develop us. Now I want to talk about the wound. So when we feel triggered, right? You just need to be self-aware. Hey, there's a wound here that I haven't healed, that I haven't dealt with, that I have trauma from. And so when you're in relationships, these people are your greatest teachers. You've got to look at them as your friend, not your enemy. Someone who's bringing up that wound for healing so that you can live a better life. You can manifest a better life. So you can rewrite that story that's playing out in your consciousness. It's all about healing. So now I'm going to dive into healing the wound. Because if you don't heal the wound, you keep repeating the pattern. You keep repeating the story, and you cannot live a fully aligned life if that wound is keeping you out of alignment. So you've got to see it as a gift. Healing doesn't happen by pretending we are never triggered. Healing happens when we respond differently. When we stop abandoning ourselves, when we offer ourselves compassion instead of criticism, when we recognize old patterns without shame. Healing is rarely dramatic. Often, it's quiet. It's choosing healthier boundaries. It's asking for support or help. It's taking responsibility for our reactions without taking responsibility for someone else's harmful behavior. It's allowing ourselves to grow one experience at a time. Now I want to talk about from reaction to response. One of the clearest signs of healing is this. You begin responding instead of reacting. The pause between what happens and how you respond gets longer. You become less controlled by old patterns. You become more grounded, more thoughtful, more present. That doesn't mean you'll never be triggered again. It means the trigger no longer controls you. And that's a beautiful kind of freedom. As we finish today's episode, I'd like to leave you with one question. Who has been your greatest mirror? Not because they made life easy, but because they helped you understand yourself more deeply. Growth often begins where comfort ends, and every moment of self-awareness is an opportunity to choose a different path. Be patient with yourself. Healing isn't about perfection. It's about becoming a little more conscious each day. Thank you for joining me on episode 4 of the Heyoka Shaman Podcast. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who's on their own journey of self-discovery. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please follow the show and leave me a review. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Instagram, and TikTok. It helps more people find these conversations. Until next time, protect your energy, heal what calls for your attention, align with your truth, and remember, sometimes the people who challenge us the most also reveal where our greatest growth is waiting. I'm Haylz, and I'll meet you between the worlds. Thanks for listening.